Trinitron TVs, the Walkman, the CD, the PlayStation video game consoles, the DVD. What have all of these got in common? They were all developed by Sony. Sony was founded on May 7th, 1946, making them 74 years old. Since then, they've become a multinational conglomerate, specialising in all kinds of industries from consumer electronics to computer hardware. But there was one product released on May 10th, 1975 that sticks out for me. It competed with something else and lost, but it left a good impression and has earned a reputation of being the first commercially successful magnetic tape format. Does this B look familiar? Well, it should do, because that's the logo for Sony's videocassette recording system, the Betamax. Although videotape and magnetic tape was developed in Germany in 1928, Sony wouldn't experiment with it until 1969. They would experiment with a videocassette format which they would call the U-matic. It would go on sale in 1971. Sony reached agreements with the Matsushita Electric Industrial Company, now known as Panasonic, and the Victor Company of Japan, or JVC, as well as 5 other non-Japanese manufacturers. The resolution for this cassette, along with their later invention and its rival, would use composite video transmission cables, typically having a 480i or 576i resolution. Countries using the NTSC format would have the 480i resolution, whilst PAL and SECAM users would have the 576 version. You may recognise these coloured cables, as they're also called RCA connectors or RCA cables, being invented in the 1940s by the Radio Corporation of America. The yellow one is the composite video cable, whilst the red and white cords are for audio. Unlike any other videocassette of that era, when playing a U-matic tape, the reels rotate in opposite directions. When playing normally, fast forwarding and rewinding, one reel would run clockwise and the other one would run anti-clockwise. The U-matic was named after the shape of the tape path when it was threaded around the video head drum, this giant thing here. It would go around the drum 180 degrees, creating a U shape. Some people call this a U-loading system. The process, like any other major format, is called helical scan. The first generation of U-matic VCRs were very large, and thus very heavy. They are approximately 30 inches wide, 24 inches deep, and 12 inches high. This would have definitely been an inconvenience for owners since they would require special shelving. Early machines also had mechanical controls limited to record, play, rewind, fast forward, stop and pause. Later models had improvements such as Dolby Audio noise reduction, remote controls, vertical interval timecode or VITC, etc. As mentioned before, the U-matic had issues like damage due to friction, distorted visuals and noises, and trouble producing the colour red. Not to mention, recording time was limited to 1 hour per cassette. The recording time for normal cassettes didn't increase whatsoever throughout the U-matic's life. To be perfectly honest, the U-matic wasn't entirely successful, but it was rather innovative and clever. In 2012, an internationally produced film called No was produced, and uniquely, it was filmed using U-matic tapes. The film was very successful, being nominated and winning several awards. The U-matic was sold as a cheap, well-specified product and was used in television programming for a couple of years, but has since been discontinued. The U-matic was among the first formats to contain the videotape inside a cassette of some kind, and even though it did have quite a few drawbacks, it was an interesting piece of technology for the time. You could think of the U-matic as like a test, to see what would come out of it for their later product. Of course, like any other format, Sony proudly made video demonstrations. However, there's something awfully creepy about the U-matic video demo they released in 1971. Have a look for yourself.
Hello, this videotape demonstration has been recorded on the Sony Color video cassette and is being played by the Sony Color video cassette system.
Sony would repeat this odd marketing technique when they released their next home video format. In late 1974 and across into early 1975, Sony met with the executives at Matsushita to discuss the forthcoming home video market. As mentioned earlier, both companies had previously worked together with the U-matic. Sony brought a prototype of what they would release in 1975 for Matsushita's engineers to analyse. I did mention that Sony also made an agreement with JVC when it came to the U-matic, but sometime during the 1970s, JVC broke the agreement and began to work alone. At a later meeting, JVC showed Sony and Panasonic their home video format prototype and said to them it was not too late to embrace their idea for the good of the industry. However, Sony dismissed this as they felt it was too close to the production of their invention to understand and agree. Eventually, after years of making and finalising, on May 10th, 1975, Sony released the Betamax home video format in Japan, and this was the demonstration tape that came with it. Anyway, this is what lurks inside a beta machine. This giant circular thing is called the head drum. The rollers inside this machine carry the tape around the drum almost in a 360-degree fashion. Like with other formats at the time, the process is called helical scan. The name beta was chosen because the word beta is the Japanese word used to describe the way in which signals are recorded onto the tape. It was also chosen because the shape of the lowercase Greek letter beta resembles the course of the tape through the transport. This is why some people call the mechanism a B-load system. Oh, and if you're wondering, in the UK we pronounce it Betamax rather than Betamax. By November of 1975, the United States had a taste of the Betamax system with the LV1901 console. This was a coloured TV monitor with a mounted Betamax system on it. You have to remember that at this stage, the Betamax was made so you could record TV programs when not at home, so you could come home and watch what you missed. Before 1975, there was no proper way of doing this. Sony used slogans like watch whatever, whenever, and heavily advertised what it could do throughout the 1970s. When it launched, the maximum recording time was 1 hour, but that increased to 5 hours as Sony continued to develop it. As I said earlier though, Sony didn't know what JVC was doing. What they were doing is what some Betamax fans have called a sloppy knockoff. Ever since the U-matic launched, JVC had been working on something similar to the Betamax but slightly larger and with more tape inside. JVC really pushed their invention, particularly after showing Sony in 1975. On September 9th, 1976, JVC unveiled the Video Home System, or VHS, to the public. 2 years before, in 1974, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, or MITI, wanted to avoid consumer confusion, so they attempted to force the Japanese video industry to standardize on just one home video recording format. When Sony was just about ready to launch the Betamax, the MITI were persuaded by Sony to adopt the Betamax system. They were then allowed to license the technology to other companies. JVC believed that an open standard where no licensing was needed was better. JVC worked to convince other companies to accept their system, not just in Japan, but across the globe. By the end of the 1970s, the VHS was in Japan, the United States, and the United Kingdom. The VHS worked almost exactly the same as the Betamax using helical scan. Inside machines there is still a drum and heads, except the loading system is called an M-load, because of the way it wraps around the head, forming a weird M shape. So now we have two similar formats. Both might look innocent, but both wanted to rule the consumer market with an iron fist. What did they do? How would they do it? Why did they do it? Well, the videotape format war, as it's usually called, has a lot more to it than just numbers. Both Sony and JVC improved their ideas significantly throughout the late 1970s, and the battle continued all the way into the late 80s, so we have a lot to go through here. To get it out of the way now, many people believe that VHS won because there were more adult films available on that format rather than Betamax. That is entirely false. Both formats had adult films. It wasn't up to JVC or Sony to decide what would be released onto VHS and Beta. Most of the time, tapes would be fabricated by different companies, and neither JVC or Sony had a proper home video company. And even then, that wasn't the original purpose of these products. They were created so you could record television programs when not at home. It was only later, when companies realised that they could rip films onto VHS and Betamax from a master, that came the most universal use for it. They were just the manufacturers of the machines and related accessories. More on those later on. For now, here's a lot of numbers. As mentioned earlier, when the Betamax launched, the maximum you could fit onto the tape was an hour. This was because of the smaller size of the cassettes. One beta cassette is 15.6 by 9.6 by 2.5 centimeters. One VHS tape is 18.7 by 10.2 by 2.5 centimeters. The weight of the cassettes doesn't matter, as neither were heavy no matter how much tape was inside. However, weight was a huge deal when it came to the machines. Depending on the manufacturer, the weight of the machines will differ, but a 1979 Betamax videocassette weighed 36 pounds, or roughly 16.3 kilograms. A JVC HR3300 VHS player weighed 29.5 pounds, or approximately 13.4 kilograms, so VHS machines were ever so slightly lighter. The weight of these two formats may not seem that important in today's world, but back then, the weight of the player would impact the material costs, shipping costs, and assembly time. Due to the overall lighter weight of the VHS machines, they would usually be cheaper, so more would have been sold and JVC would have gained a higher monopoly. As mentioned before, when JVC launched their video home system, the recording time was 2 hours. That would have been enough time for a film. One thing I find rather interesting is that the recording time was sort of glossed over by Sony. What you're currently watching is a Betamax salesman training video from 1977. Watch this little clip of it.
Right inside this cassette. Well, how much can you get on there? You can record up to 60 minutes on a single Betamax cassette. And the great beauty of videotape is you can use the same cassette over and over and re-record.
Notice how the salesman is more interested in how reusable the Betamax is rather than how much you can record on it. The original question the customer asked was how much can you record, not is it reusable. The way the salesman quickly moves on kind of implies that the recording time was overlooked. He's more interested in the Betamax longevity rather than how much you can fit on one tape. Here's some more figures for you. When the Betamax launched in 1975, the tape would move at 1.57 inches per second, or IPS, offering a resolution of 250 lines, lower video noise, and less chroma crosstalk than its rival. This was called Beta 1. A normal VHS tape would move at 1.31 IPS, allowing the system to be able to record for 2 hours. Sony quickly realised that in order for their invention to offer the same capacity, they'd have to bring the speed down, hence Beta 2. Beta 2 allowed the tape to move at 0.79 inches per second, which did give them a 2-hour recording time, but this lowered the resolution by 10 lines. In other words, Sony was very fiddly and wanted everything to be exactly right. This fiddling led to the VHS becoming dominant, and by 1980, they controlled 60% of the North American market. By 1981, Sony fell into a hole. In the US, Betamax sales had dipped to only 25%. There have been many debates on why this happened. Many have said this was because of Sony's marketing and licensing strategy. Sony didn't allow that many companies to make Betamax machines. They did eventually give licensing rights to Sanyo, Toshiba, NEC and a few other companies, but not many. JVC allowed dozens of other companies to make VHS players with all different specifications and prices. This quickly allowed the VHS to grow, especially by 1981. In terms of marketing, both JVC and Sony went completely different ways. Sony used most of their energy on time shifting and how you could watch whatever whenever. They simply didn't see the future when it came to the Betamax and only really focused on what can be done rather than what should be done. JVC, along with many other manufacturers of VHS, were more open and spent more time and money creating relationships with the currently developing video rental market, hence the home video industry. This would be very important throughout the 1980s, since video rental stores, particularly family-run ones, appeared all over the place. Despite the marketing differences, many companies still made both VHS and beta tapes to please both types of consumers. During 1982, Roadshow Home Video began releasing its first titles in Australia, and RCA Columbia Pictures Home Video began operation. Around this time, Sony realised that if they made accessories and beta-related products, they could earn more money. But before we get onto that, I must quickly tell you about the common Betamax tape lengths. The number corresponds to how long the tape was in feet. The main ones are L125, L165, L250, L370, L500, L750, and L830. With these new tapes, the maximum you could get on one tape was 5 hours, using an L830 cassette on Beta 3 mode. Yes, Beta 3 was a thing. These lengths would become more important later on. Along with the Betamax, Sony released 15 Betamax related products, or at least 15 other products with Beta in its name. These include
Sony Beta Hi-Fi,
Betaplex, Betacam, Betacam SP, Betacam SX, Betacart, Betamovie, Betascan, Betascan 2, Betaskipscan, Digital Betacam, ED Beta, Super Betamovie, Super Beta, and Super Beta Hi-Fi. I'm not going to talk about all of them since some of them don't even have a Wikipedia page. The ones we're interested in are Beta Hi-Fi, Beta Cam, Beta Movie, ED Beta, and Super Beta. The first of these 5 to come around was Beta Cam, released on August 7th, 1982. Several people seem to confuse Beta Cam with Betamax. Some say that Betamax continued to be used in the professional market way after the 1980s. They think it lost in the consumer market but was more popular in the professional market. However, that was in fact the job of the Beta Cam. After the format war ended, it was still in use until around 2006. Betacam is still brought up today for archival purposes. Up next is Betamovie, released sometime in 1983. Unfortunately, I couldn't get an exact date. Betamovie is the brand name for a range of consumer-grade camcorders. In this sense, a camcorder is a single unit comprising of a video camera and a video recorder. It would allow you to record life's moments on a regular Betamax cassette. You'd then place the cassette into your Betamax VCR when you get home and re-watch what you recorded. In its own way, Betamovie was a revelation. Cameras were definitely not new in the 1980s, but for home use, Betamovie was the first of its kind, or at least the first to be commercially successful. Using an L830 tape, you could record up to 216 minutes or 3 hours and 36 minutes using the PAL encode and 300 minutes or 5 hours using the NTSC standard on Beta 3. For home use, this was easily plenty. However, like with everything, there were some drawbacks. Firstly, this took a while to construct. Betamax cassettes were smaller, so it should have been easy to fit all of the essentials from a beta player into a camcorder. However, this was actually a problem. The silver head drum in beta players were usually larger than those seen in VHS players, so somehow they had to shrink that head down to fit inside the camcorder. This was very difficult, but eventually it was manageable. However, this would lead to another issue. With all these mechanical parts inside a small, compact space, these camcorders became rather heavy, making them an inconvenience. There was practically nothing Sony could do to make them lighter and easier to carry, and the only other solution was a shoulder strap. With all these limitations, playback was also impossible on these cameras. Once you finished recording something, you'd have to go back home, place a beta cassette into your VCR, and see what you recorded. The whole limitation of the product cut its life. Sony moved on from it by the late 1980s.
Thank goodness for Betamovie's long recording capabilities. Looks like Betamovie's a winner all around.
The third extra would be Beta Hi-Fi. Beta Hi-Fi, or Beta High Fidelity, was an audio upgrade. It improved the playback of sound as if it was coming from a CD. The result was an audio with an 80 decibel dynamic range with less than 0.005% wow and flutter. Some Sony NTSC models were marketed as Hi-Fi Ready. This odd but clever slogan ended up working in countries using the NTSC television standard. Super Betamax, or Super Beta, was introduced to the world in early 1985. It increased the resolution from 240 lines to 290 lines, making a nearly identical copy of live television. The chroma resolution was poor, however, limiting to approximately 30 lines of resolution, whereas live broadcast chrominance resolutions were over 100. But overall, if you had a Super Betamax player with Beta Hi-Fi, you would be pleased by the sound and picture quality. Sony pushed the upgrades again in 1988 with Extended Definition Betamax or ED Beta. This allowed a viewer to see up to 500 lines of resolution, which for 1988 was very impressive. However, 1988 is considered the end of Beta by many people, so maybe if ED Beta was available a couple of years before, Beta could have stuck around in the consumer market for a few more years. Despite all the greatness these 5 extras brought, JVC topped all of them. Before we get onto that though, here are all the tape lengths. While Beta had 3 different modes, Beta 1, 2 and 3, VHS had what we call Standard Play Mode or SP, Long Play Mode or LP, and Extended Play Mode or EP, the latter also being called Super Long Play Mode or SLP. Beta tapes were named after the tape length in feet. JVC named their cassette types based on the approximate running time on SP mode. In the NTSC market, the most common lengths were T20, T30, T60, T90, T120, T140, T150, T160, T180, T200, T210 and T240. For PAL, the most common tape types were E30, E45, E60, E90, E120, E150, E180, E195, E200, E210, E240 and E300. If you're in the UK and you have some VHS tapes, if you're lucky, the length of the tape would be printed on the bottom like this. For example, this 25th anniversary Rocky VHS has E129 printed on the side, meaning that the whole tape from start to finish is approximately 129 minutes long. Personally, having it named after how many minutes you could fit on the tape is better. Don't start saying that it's slightly irritating how it's always only in minutes and not in hours, because that's not true. Some manufacturers, like Sky, put both the running time in minutes and in hours. Across the 1980s, to compete with Sony, JVC introduced its own extra bits and bobs. These include DVHS, SVHS, VHS-C, VHS Hi-Fi, VHS HQ, and WVHS. I have mentioned DVHS and WVHS before. I won't speak about them again here, since they were made after the video format war. Out of the remaining 4, the first one to be introduced was VHS-C.
Video movie camera. Panasonic proudly announces the new NV-MC10 VHS-C movie camera.
This was a tiny cassette with either 30 or 60 minutes available in one cassette. It would normally be 92 by 58 by 20mm. Several fans of Beta say that JVC were always copying Sony's ideas. Well, I'd like to disprove that word always. Whilst Beta Movie made its first appearance in 1983, VHS-C was first available in 1982. Like Beta Movie, VHS-C was used in camcorders, recording life's moments. However, what made this more unique was that instead of fitting a normal size VHS tape into a camcorder, this little guy would go inside instead. Once done, instead of having to go back home to see what you recorded, you could just play it back on the spot. This small advantage pushed it ahead of the competition significantly. Also, instead of JVC having to make a load of new machines just for this tiny thing, they made VHS-C to VHS adapters. You can still buy them on eBay. This might seem like a downside, but remember, even if you didn't have an adapter, playback was possible, so you could simply see what you filmed from where you are. Since the cassette was smaller, the cameras would be smaller, lighter, and therefore easier to operate when moving. As you can probably guess, VHS-C was superior to Beta Movie, and by the end of the 1980s, Sony had moved on to Video 8. It's exactly the same concept, but it's just a different cassette, based on the 8mm video format. Hilariously, Video 8 would eventually fail too because of VHS-C. Still, those who owned and used Video 8 found it to be comfortable. Its 120-minute capacity worked for those who had one, and it was less bulky than what came before it. The Video 8 begs the question though. Since it was very successful, why couldn't they just do what JVC did and invent a smaller cassette with an optional adapter in the first place and not go through the huge struggle of using average-sized beta tapes? That question should be easy to answer, but there doesn't seem to be one simple conclusion. The other 3 inventions, VHS Hi-Fi, HQ and SVHS, were all to improve the picture or sound. SVHS or Super VHS launched in 1987 and was perhaps the most useful, at least when it came to recording times. Depending the TV standard and speed mode, you could fit up to 15 hours on one tape. That's 3 times longer than what the Betamax offered. However, SVHS only improved the television quality to 400 lines, whilst ED Beta was 500. VHS Hi-Fi arriving in 1984, like Beta Hi-Fi, improved the sound quality. However, it wasn't until the early 1990s where it became more acceptable on VHS VCRs. The sound was either at 70 decibels or 90 decibels.
Longitudinal audio is recorded onto the narrow edge tracks of the tape. But hi-fi performance comes from 2 separate flying audio heads that record stereo sound over the full videotape width, the portion traditionally reserved for video signals only. The sound is laid down first, deep within the tape. Next, the video heads put down a picture signal. This is depth multiplex audio FM recording. The result is VHS quality pictures with sound performance that approaches the finest digital recordings, an effective audio writing speed of nearly 230 inches per second. Television and music have just taken a quantum leap.
All this technological gubbins doesn't really matter today. If you want a VCR, normally just buy a nice cheap one on eBay, perhaps with a remote, and discard all the extras. Were these extras important back then though? Yes. If you aren't into old technology, half the information on Wikipedia would make no sense to you. Even I don't understand some of it. But back then, the differences in audio, visuals, marketing, etc. all mattered, and both companies tried as much as they could to impress and engage as many people as possible. Several say that 1988 was the final year for Beta, since everything that mattered was now on both formats, but was seen more reliable or significant on VHS. It's not wholly Sony's fault that they lost. JVC and other VHS collaborators saw what Sony was doing and wanted to make their own version of what Sony made, but make it better. Sony was already hurt when the war began because of the smaller cassette size and the tape length. 1 hour was not enough, and it still isn't today. Plus, across 1983 and 84, there was a lawsuit. Many television film production giants noticed that Betamax infringed on their copyright. Companies were worried that people would begin recording live broadcasts onto tape and then sell them to make money. Universal wasn't having it, and so in 1984, they filed a lawsuit against the Sony Corporation of America. Colloquially known as the Betamax case, this was a decision by the US Supreme Court, which ruled that the making of individual copies of television shows for time-shifting and private home purposes does not constitute copyright infringement, but it is instead fair use. Sony won this court battle, and I guess they used it as an advantage to do whatever they wanted with the Betamax. However, copyright was effectively murdered by the home video industry, and civilians began selling home recordings of films and shows to make money, especially on the black market. This is why at the beginning of many tapes from large film and TV companies have an anti-piracy warning. These started off quite calm, like this RCA Columbia Pictures one.
You should have noticed a red leading edge bearing the RCA Columbia Pictures logo on the cassette you're now watching. If you didn't, have a quick look now before the film starts. If this video cassette hasn't got a red leading edge, we'd like to hear about it.
But as time went on, this system became even more abused, so to quote-unquote scare pirates, this became a thing.
The pirates are out to get you. Don't let them brand you with their mark. Piracy funds organised crime and will destroy our film and video industry. Piracy costs jobs and will destroy our music and publishing industry. Piracy funds terrorism and will destroy our development and your future enjoyment. Don't touch the hot stuff. Cool is copyright. Copyright is a matter of fact.
If you have any knowledge of the manufacture or sale of counterfeit film and video product or related software.
After 88, Betamax was virtually dead, and Sony began to make VHS VCRs. However, Sony continued to develop Betamax into the 90s and 2000s. The last Betamax recorder was made by Sony in 2002. On November the 10th, 2015, Sony announced that it would no longer be working on Betamax cassettes. Production and sales ended in March of 2016 after almost 41 excruciating years. VHS would meet the same fate. After the DVD launched in 1996 and hitting the rest of the globe by 1999, manufacturers began to slow down and stop making VHS machines and cassettes. By 2003, DVD would surpass them in sales. From 2005 to 2007, several home entertainment companies switched to DVD entirely. JVC themselves left VHS alone in 2008. Funai, another Japanese company, was the last to make any sort of VHS part, doing so in July of 2016. It's very interesting how Betamax would fall in 1988, but they wouldn't die until 2016, alongside their nemesis.
The picture. And Sony Betamax records a sharper picture than VHS. That's not just our opinion. In tests throughout the country, more people said the picture was sharper with Sony Betamax than VHS. So how many choices do you really have? Only one. Sony Betamax, a sharper picture.
After all these years, Betamax is still brought up in conversations and videos. People still preserve beta, which is nice. In today's world, beta is seen as a more expensive and rarer machine. You can still buy beta tapes and machines on eBay. If you're lucky enough, you can find some at a yard sale or a car boot sale. Probably the biggest reason why people still keep Betamax players and tapes is because of nostalgia. Even though VHS won, and many more people use and continue to use it rather than Betamax, VHS will never take Beta's crown as the first majorly successful videotape recording format. VHS beat Beta in pretty much everything, but that doesn't mean that Beta isn't an interesting format. As we've clearly seen, Beta was clever and innovative, but simply not as much as its main rival. We can go even further if we want to. There are a bunch of other long gone but memorable home video formats throughout the 70s and 80s. RCA will get their turn eventually, don't you worry. Thank you very much for watching this documentary. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all later. Goodbye.